Attorney for Massachusetts. The Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Massachusetts, Carol Rose, whose organization is a plaintiff in the successful lawsuit filed in federal court in New Hampshire seeking to enjoin Trump's administration's attempt to end birthright citizenship, and Marian Albert, senior attorney with Lawyers for Civil Rights, the lead attorney in her organization's successful birthright citizenship case brought in Massachusetts federal court. We are here today on President's Day, of all days, because the judiciary and the rule of law in the United States are under attack from the President of the United States. Donald Trump is going after our Constitution and our courts like no president ever before in our nation's history. Just the other day, Trump tweeted that, quote, "He who saves our country does not violate any laws," a line attributed to Napoleon, and later echoed by Richard Nixon when he said that when a president commits an otherwise illegal act, it is, by definition, not illegal because the president did it. They are both wrong. Today is President's Day, not King's Day. In the United States, we inaugurate, not coronate. In the United States, we have a history which shows us what can happen to those who utter such anti-democratic views. Since Trump's inauguration day, there is one word that describes the second Trump administration to date: lawless. To Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, Elon Musk, and their minions, the Constitution, its separation of powers, and its checks and balances and nuisances are just nuisances to be ignored, not the foundations on which our democracy is built. It has been more than 250 years since the shot heard round the world here in Lexington and Concord. But what the Founding Fathers built, the Billionaire Boys Club, would tear asunder. In less than 1 month, we have seen Donald Trump issue a series of executive orders that are blatantly, patently, and obviously unconstitutional and unlawful. We have seen Donald Trump take a wrecking ball to the historically independent Department of Justice and try to rebuild it as his own personal law firm. Trump's arrogant belief that he can supersede the Constitution and the laws passed by Congress with an executive order has spawned dozens of lawsuits against his administration. And federal judges across the country, judges appointed by Democratic and Republican presidents alike, including Trump himself, are doing their jobs, moving swiftly to hear the cases, and for now, preventing some of the most egregiously unlawful Trump policies from taking effect. Revoking birthright citizenship, blocked. Freezing all federal funding, blocked. Dismantling the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, blocked. Pulling down public health websites, blocked. Capping funding for critical health research at the National Institutes of Health, blocked. Denying gender-affirming health care to transgender youth, blocked. Allowing Musk's Department of Government Efficiency to access the Treasury Department's payments system, blocked. And the list goes on and on. Last week, over at the Justice Department, lawyer after lawyer resigned rather than violate legal ethics and compromise their principles. Trump, Vance, and Musk are on a rampage as a result of these rulings, vilifying judges who dare to rule against them, with Musk calling these judges evil, saying that they need to be fired or impeached, suggesting that the administration simply defy the court rulings they don't like, as if the rulings are television programs they can skip over to get to reruns of The Apprentice. When the new Attorney General, Pam Bondi, was asked during her confirmation hearings if she would always uphold the rule of law in the United States, She avoided answering if she would disobey an unlawful order from President Trump. Thankfully, that's not how the Founding Fathers drew up the Constitution. We have a separation of powers. We have three co-equal branches of government. And one of them is a judiciary whose principal job is, as the Supreme Court explained more than 200 years ago in Marbury versus Madison, to, quote, say what the law is, to say what is constitutional. That is the job of the judiciary, not the president and not the Congress. So when a court says no, the real response is to comply and not to defy, which is what Trump and Musk and Vance are now doing. Trump, Vance, and Musk's reckless rhetoric undermines public trust in our judicial system and poses a direct threat to the independence of our courts. It inches us closer to authoritarianism, where the rule of law is supplanted by the rule of a dictator. The founders warned of people like this, who would trade our laws for lawlessness, for their own profit or for their own political needs. But the founders had the foresight to ensure that we have a strong, co-equal, and independent judiciary to serve as a bulwark against tyranny, to prevent the concentration of power in any single branch of government. And in these trying times, it is imperative that we all stand firm in defense of our democratic principles. The Marbury case said the courts decide. We cannot let Trump cast them aside. Voters must hold our leaders accountable and demand that they respect the constitutional limits of their power. Lawyers in the Department of Justice must continue to show integrity, stand up to this administration, and stand up for the rule of law. My Republican colleagues in Congress, well, they fear President Trump. There's no question about it. He has followed the Godfather playbook and made them an offer they can't refuse, a primary opponent in their Republican primary if they don't go along with everything that he wants them to follow. To them, I say, put our democracy's health ahead of their own personal political health. Speak out. Defend the Constitution and the rule of law. It takes only 4 Republican votes to block any of Trump's misdeeds. So on this President's Day, with a lawless president in the Oval Office, let us unite in reaffirming our commitment to the courts, to the rule of law, and the preservation of our constitutional order. Together we can resist the erosion of our democratic institutions and ensure that the United States remains a nation where the law reigns supreme, and liberty and justice is upheld for everyone. And now, I would like to turn to our incredibly talented and experienced group of speakers and begin with former United States District Court Judge Nancy Gertner. Welcome, Judge.
I am glad to be here, even though it is perhaps the worst day of the year. I'm glad to be here to talk about these kinds of issues. Let me start by talking about what representatives have been saying, what Musk has been saying, what the president has been saying. So one representative said that the judge in Rhode Island should be impeached because he is a, quote, partisan activist. And he said federal judges who are appointed for life, according to the Constitution, however, can only be impeached if they are accused of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Likewise, shortly after Musk tweeted about another federal judge, again, we saw a representative parroting that language, which is to say a judge that was too activist in his rulings against Trump should be impeached. Where were these people when they learned about a federal judge, a United States Supreme Court justice, who was regularly taking money for trips over $500,000 reportedly by some outlets. Where were these people talking about impeachment when judges were not recusing themselves under circumstances, justices were not recusing themselves under circumstances when they plainly should have? Where were these voices when we were hearing what we were hearing about the United States Supreme Court regularly? They were silent. Now we're talking about, now they're talking about impeachment. When the answers with respect to the court are these: what the judges are doing who are affirming the Constitution, who are throwing out, who are granting temporary restraining orders with respect to various Trump programs, what they are doing is so clearly right. The issue here is that Trump has gone so far afield. The distance between what he has done and what the law requires is so clear that it doesn't take an activist judge to identify that. It takes only a judge with breath. It takes only a judge that is essentially aware of the Constitution and alive. And it doesn't matter, as Senator Markey says, whether or not these are Republican judges, whether these are Democratic judges. What Trump is doing is so far afield from the Constitution that a temporary restraining order is all that an authentic and principled judge can do. Yet, nevertheless, Trump is talking about that being the basis for impeachment. The restraining order standard is the likelihood of success on the merits and irreparable harm. The likelihood of success on the merits means that these judges have to predict whether these cases will win or lose, and that prediction is clear, given the clarity of the violations here. I've said in other occasions, I couldn't quite figure out what the president was doing, with respect to these orders. Either they didn't know that they were illegal, which is preposterous, or they knew that what they were doing was illegal and their only purpose was to intimidate, which is getting closer to the truth, or that they know that they're illegal and they don't care. That's the frightening constitutional crisis of all. So it doesn't take an activist judge to be able to say that what Trump is doing, what Musk is doing, is certifiably, categorically, and unquestionably wrong. And we will be seeing more of these cases across the country. Again, it doesn't take activism. They will percolate up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court can't possibly take all the cases that are percolating now through the system. 45 some odd cases have been brought. The Supreme Court can't possibly be in a position to take that. So what will happen, however, if Trump or his minions disobey these rules? Each judge will have an opportunity to determine whether or not they should be held in contempt. They can be fined. They can even, officials of the government can even be imprisoned. There are penalties available to judges under these circumstances. And what if nothing works? Then it's up to us. Then it's up to the public. Then it's up to the public to resoundingly let their voices be known. In the meantime, what is all of this impeachment talk doing? What this impeachment talk is doing is exacerbating the threats against federal judges, seeking to intimidate the next judge that gets the next case. Threats against federal judges have doubled and tripled. One judge that I spoke to talked about his daughter's name being made public, and she's being attacked. He can't get out of his house any morning without the marshals being there. But the courts are holding, notwithstanding these preposterous threats, notwithstanding these horrifying threats, the courts are holding. But as I said before, that if the Supreme Court takes even one or two of these cases, the others will stand. And if Trump and Musk and Vance disobey these orders on this President's Day, it has to be said and said clearly, then it is up to the rest of us to demonstrate our rage at what Trump and Musk and Vance are doing to the constitutional order, and to demonstrate our rage in every way that we can. Thank you.
Next, we're going to hear from James Farmer, retired former interim U.S. Attorney for the District of Massachusetts.
Thank you, Senator Markey. I appreciate the opportunity to make a few remarks. I'm here today because I am deeply troubled at what I see in today's Department of Justice. I retired from the Department of Justice in 2018 after 33 years of service, 38 years of federal service if you include my federal clerkship and my time in the military. Most of that DOJ service was at the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Boston, plus some time on multiple sensitive investigations in Washington. During that time, I served, as indicated by Senator Markey earlier, in a number of senior supervisory positions in the U.S. Attorney's Office. And in fact, I was the chief federal law enforcement officer at the time of the 9/11 attacks and led the initial investigations for the first few days after that event. I loved and am proud of my DOJ service. It was an immense privilege to serve daily with dedicated, ethical, talented, and experienced colleagues in a job where, in the words of one of my colleagues, the only thing we need to figure out every day is what's the right thing to do. Politics played no part in any of our decisions, legal decisions, with respect to criminal law. The lawyers at DOJ are government civil servants of whom every single taxpayer should be proud. Denigrating these public servants as being part of a deep state is just verbal playground childishness by politicians intended only to pull the wool over the eyes of their less knowledgeable followers. So I am shocked, saddened, and angered by what I see at DOJ. I am shocked to see federal prosecutors fired or demoted for doing their jobs well, and federal investigative agents apparently also in the crosshairs, for having successfully and ethically investigated and prosecuted the so-called January 6 defendants, who assaulted and beat police officers, destroyed or stole government property, and otherwise created criminal havoc at the U.S. Capitol. These cases resulted in guilty pleas and criminal convictions after jury trials before federal judges who ensured that the cases were legally sound and appropriately pursued. Indeed, many of those judges themselves have expressed their own shock at what they saw in the evidence of the defendant's conduct. I am equally shocked at the retributive actions taken against federal prosecutors involved in the investigations and prosecutions of then private citizen Donald Trump. Those cases were thoroughly and legally investigated, prepared according to the highest ethical and professional standards of the department, and I am sure reviewed and approved at the highest levels of the Department of Justice. Those lawyers should be commended for their service and not fired or demoted. Punishing lawyers who zealously perform the jobs they were assigned to do is, to my knowledge, unprecedented at the Department of Justice. If the term weaponization of law enforcement has any meaning at all, surely it includes these third world retributive firings by the current DOJ administration. It is both shocking and dumb to penalize some of the department's most skilled and experienced attorneys for doing their jobs brilliantly. These moves only make policy sense if the objective is to weaken and demoralize the lawyers who are the backbone of professional federal prosecution. I can imagine this kind of vindictive retribution in Moscow or Beijing or Tehran, but it pains me to see it in the Department of Justice of the United States. These firings on top of the January 6 pardons truly smack of a quiet, pro-crime agenda in this administration. I'm likewise deeply troubled at the drama presently unfolding at the Department of Justice, in which the Deputy Attorney General demanded that federal prosecutors move to dismiss an important corruption indictment against the sitting mayor of the city of New York. The grounds for that action, which were publicly asserted by senior department officials, seem to me completely inappropriate and wholly political. More importantly, they appeared inappropriate and political to senior prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, including the United States Attorney herself. An office, by the way, some of whose prosecutors President Trump recently referred to as scum and lunatics. Those rationale for dismissing the indictment also appeared pretextual to 5 senior prosecutors in the department's public integrity section, all of whom courageously resigned from the department rather than file a legally unjustified dismissal motion. I am not alone in my indignation. I know former senior DOJ prosecutors from coast to coast who share the same shock, sadness, and anger. Many, like the resigning prosecutors in New York and Washington, are speaking out publicly against these injustices. All sense a dangerous threat to the concept of equal justice under law, a tenet we have all understood as fundamental during our DOJ service. I join their protest.
Next, we're going to hear from Carol Rose, who is the Executive Director of the ACLU of Massachusetts.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you all for being here and for organizing us today in this fight for our democracy. As patriots, we in Massachusetts have a history of engaging in collective work of defending our democracy whenever and wherever it's under attack. After all, it was the good people of Massachusetts who turned out, as the Senator said, from the cities and towns to cast off a king some 250 years ago. Well, now it's our turn. Our turn for the good people of Massachusetts to once again be called to action. We must fight these efforts to destroy our social contract, the one that sets forth our aspirations for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all people, not just a few self-appointed billionaires. As you've heard today, we have a lot of tools in our democracy arsenal, and one of the most powerful tools continues to be the courts. And make no mistake, the courts still matter. They're an important bulwark for our democracy, and as Judge Gertner said, so far, they're holding. On his first day in office, President Trump issued an executive order to end birthright citizenship, and the ACLU filed a legal challenge within 2 hours. We were ready on day one. 2 days later, we sued to stop the Trump administration's plans to expand fast-track deportations without a fair legal process, without due process, another clear violation of the Constitution. Last week, the ACLU sued again to stop Trump's attempt to end asylum at the border. And after that, we sued to block their moves to open secret detention camps in Guantanamo. We also are filing suits to protect LGBTQ people and their families. We sued to block an order to end gender-affirming medical care. And we sued to stop the government from denying transgender people accurate passports to use as travel documents for safe passage. So the courts matter. Indeed, the courts are mission critical. But so are actions by non-lawyers who care about our country. We need to get every person involved who cares about equality and liberty to get involved, to sign up. Already, the ACLU Action Team has more than 4,000 volunteers just here in Massachusetts and thousands more across the country who've signed up. And people can do that by going to aclum.org. Whatever your walk of life, whether you're a lawyer or a student or a teacher, a banker, a bus driver, a healthcare worker, an artist, a programmer, a gamer, or a retiree, we need you in this fight to defend our democracy. Every day already, ACLU organizers and these volunteers were on the ground in communities across Massachusetts. We're sharing Know Your Rights information, and we're hosting seminars so people can learn their rights. People want to know their rights in these uncertain times, and the demand is skyrocketing. We're hearing from educators, healthcare workers, librarians, business people, workers, researchers, religious leaders, even some journalists. People want to know their rights, and it makes sense because knowledge is power, so you should know your rights. And we need those people to not just learn their rights, but then teach others to know them, to join social media platforms, to send emails, to make phone calls, write letters, table at public events, simply show up for democracy and for our values. And if the ACLU isn't your thing, join another group, another community, whatever platform feels right to you. You know, the ACLU, we work with hundreds of social justice organizations across the country and across our Commonwealth. We don't do this work alone, and we need everybody to be part of it. Democracy is a muscle. The more we use it, the stronger it becomes. I'll end with a little good news update since this is a press conference. Last week, federal judges in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maryland, and Washington state all issued injunctions to temporarily halt Trump's birthright citizenship executive order. That included the ACLU lawsuit, which was in New Hampshire, but also the cases filed here in Massachusetts by my friend and colleague from the Lawyers for Civil Rights and from Attorney General Andrea Campbell, one of many that our state Attorney General has joined in filing to challenge these worst excesses of the Trump administration. Also last week, a federal judge issued an order in our transgender health care case, again, permitting people to continue to receive life-saving medical care. So these court rulings aren't just hypothetical. They have a real impact on the real lives of people and their families. The courts still matter. And the law, especially when we combine it with people power and with courageous leadership from people like Senator Markey and our other members of our elected delegation, together the law and people power and courageous leaders, they will, in fact, defend our democracy. So I urge all of us not to give in to despair, but instead to join this fight for freedom. Thank you.
And finally, we're going to hear from Marian Albert, the senior attorney at Lawyers for Civil Rights. Well,
hello, everyone. Like Senator Markey said, my name is Marian Albert. I'm a senior attorney at Lawyers for Civil Rights. And first, I'd like to say thank you, Senator Markey, for bringing us all together today and for your unwavering commitment to protecting our democracy. It is an honor to stand alongside other legal and civil rights leaders and advocates. At Lawyers for Civil Rights, we believe that justice must be accessible, independent, and fearless. That's why we fight every day to protect the rights of the most vulnerable, including immigrants, communities of color, and those who are too often silenced. But today, we are here because the very foundation of our democracy, the judiciary itself, is under attack. We have seen this before, but today the threats are not subtle. They are brazen, relentless, and dangerous. When a president and his allies launch direct assaults on the judiciary, they are not just attacking judges, they are attacking the principles of fairness and accountability that define our legal system. The judiciary is the ultimate safeguard against government overreach and constitutional violations. But when those in power attempt to manipulate the courts for their own gain, when they vilify judges for simply doing their job, they are laying the groundwork for a system where justice is no longer blind, where the law is no longer fair, and where people who rely on the courts for protection are left vulnerable. We need a fair, independent, and courageous judiciary more than ever. But the courts cannot do it alone. They need all of us too. They need all of us to demand accountability, to protect their independence, and to remind those in power that the rule of law is not optional. At Lawyers for Civil Rights, we are fighting back. Every day we go to court on behalf of people whose rights have been violated or threatened, people who need the legal system to work as it intended. Right now, we are challenging the Trump administration's latest attack on birthright citizenship, an unconstitutional and dangerous assault to strip U.S.-born children of their most fundamental right. The Constitution is clear. If you were born in this country, you are a citizen. No executive order, no political rhetoric, and no unconstitutional policy can change that. But we know these attacks do not exist in isolation. The same forces trying to dismantle birthright citizenship are the ones working to suppress the vote, to gut housing protections, and to make it harder for working families to stay in their homes. That's why at LCR, we are not only fighting in court, but we are also organizing, advocating, and ensuring that those who are most affected by these policies have a voice. And we know that democracy cannot function if people are shut out of the ballot box. That's why we are deeply engaged in voting rights advocacy, ensuring that communities of color have equal access to the ballot. Just last year, we expanded our election protection program to cover New Hampshire, mobilizing hundreds of legal volunteers to defend the right to vote. Because we know that when marginalized communities are silenced at the polls, their rights in every other area, including education, housing, and immigration, are at risk. This is what is at stake when we talk about attacks on the judiciary. This is why we must resist every effort to weaken the courts, to undermine their legitimacy, and to bend the rule of law to serve the interests of the rich and powerful. The courts are meant to be a great equalizer, but only if we hold them to that standard, only if we fight to keep them fair, independent, and accountable to the people they serve. At Lawyers for Civil Rights, we are in this fight for the long haul, and with all of you standing next to us, and with all of us together, I know we will prevail. Thank you.
So, questions?
Senator, could you explain a little bit about what the options are for the public if all federal avenues are exhausted? You touched on it.
Yeah, well, I mean, first they'll be in the courts. As I said, the courts can impose contempt for violation of the orders as against individual officers who are involved in these cases. Contempt has various options, which could include jailing people until they comply. If all of that fails, and then the next issue is appeal, and the Trump administration is clearly appealing one of those orders now, then there has to be public outcry. Every senator, every representative has to be deluged with letters. There have to be demonstrations. There have to be, the public has to make clear that this is not okay, and has to make it clear through every avenue we know how. One of the things I have to say, and this is a little out of role, we can't wait until 2 years from now for elections to have the voice of the people be made clear. It has to be made clear now, particularly if there's a violation of the orders, of the lawful orders of courts.
Questions?
Senator, some people criticize Democrats for moving too slowly to respond to some of these issues. What do you make of that criticism?
Well, I've been up and fighting from day one. Trump wants to be a dictator, and he must be fought every single day that he is the president of the United States. He has tried to usurp the powers of Congress. He is seeking to intimidate the judiciary. Those two branches are the check on the president. So from my perspective, this is going to be a fight every single day. The American people shouldn't beg for their rights. They have to take their rights back from Trump. And that's going to be something that we do on an insistent, persistent, consistent, daily basis to fight him. And we're going to begin this week as we take up Trump's budget, and we're going to fight all of these provisions which he is seeking to implement, which is going to loot the programs that go right to the heart of the protections for the American people. In the House of Representatives budget, they have already passed a resolution that will loot $880 billion out of Medicaid. That's for seniors in Massachusetts. That's for poor children in Massachusetts and all across the country. 51% of all federal funding for Massachusetts is Medicaid. They want to loot it. The same thing is true with regard to food stamps for SNAP. Their resolution cuts those programs by $230 billion. 50% of all children in the United States at some point in their lives are on food stamps, are on SNAP programs. They want to loot the clean energy programs, wind and solar, battery storage technologies that are the plan for the future to reduce the harm which hurricanes and fires in LA have already given us a preview of coming atrocities. Those three events, that is Hurricane Milton and Helene and the fires in Los Angeles, $500 billion of damage. But the natural gas industry wants all of the programs for renewables slashed in our country. That's the agenda of the Republican Party. So we're going to stand up. We're going to fight every single day. You'll see on the floor of the Senate in this coming week amendment after amendment to put Republican House and Senate members on record that they have to decide, are they with Trump or are they with the health care, the education, the environmental programs to go right to the protection of every family in our country. In 1900, 18% of all children in our country died before the age of 5. In 1900, life expectancy in our country was 48 years of age. And then we introduced vaccines and Medicaid and Medicare and the Affordable Care Act and clean air and clean water to extend life expectancy by another 30 years. All of that's under assault. And we're going to make sure that people understand that there's a fight going on. And we're going to need the courts as well to play their part in making sure that Trump cannot implement unconstitutional actions which undermine the traditions of our country. So I'm going to be up and fighting as I've been doing over this past 6 weeks, and I'm not stopping until Trump is no longer the president of the United States. Yes, I'm sorry.
The shutdown should be on the table to block some of those cuts from Republicans?
We are going to, the Democrats in the Senate this coming week, we're going to be filing dozens of amendments that are going to be forcing Republicans to take a position in public. And ultimately, the Republicans are heading towards a shutdown of the government initiated by themselves when the continuing resolution for the budget expires in the middle of March. They are the ones who are heading towards shutting down the government because they are acting in an unconstitutional way, but towards the goal of dismantling the federal government as we know it. When, we're going to have a hearing on all of these issues, but I'll just throw in the Department of Education as another example where Trump wants to dismantle it. Well, here in Massachusetts, we call that Title I. That's the program for poor children to get access to the educational opportunities which they need. We call that programs for disabled kids with disabilities to be able to get access to the educational programs which they need. If they defund all those programs, it's going to cascade right down onto the streets of Malden and Brockton and Roxbury and Dorchester as these services are removed from the lives of these children who need it the most. And the more they do it, the more it's going to highlight the cruelty and the harm which they are orchestrating towards children and everyone in our society. So this battle is going to absolutely hit a boiling point over the next 3 or 4 weeks, and my hope is that, as Judge Gertner said, that ultimately we're going to see people responding all across this country, in anger at what Trump is trying to perpetrate.
Do you think people don't understand the nature of how drastic the cuts are? Is that going to be a delegation's plans to showcase what the Republicans are trying to do?
No matter where I go in the state of Massachusetts, people come over to me and say, fight Trump, fight Musk. They say it all day, every day, no matter where I am, and that is what I am doing. We need to ensure that Massachusetts is up first. We are the founding state. We're the revolutionaries. We were the revolutionaries with the abolitionist movement, with the suffragette movement, with the same-sex marriage movement, with the anti-Vietnam movement, and people want us up and fighting as the elected representatives of Massachusetts down in Washington, and that is what I am doing every single day. Questions from anybody?
Can you speak a little bit more to, all of you have already kind of touched on the cascading or the trickle-down effects for Massachusetts residents. I know that oftentimes people think because we're in a blue state that we're safeguarded, or at least we have elected officials that might be able to defend us from some of these attacks. Can you speak more to what the day-to-day effects might be on residents here in the area?
Yes. Massachusetts is not safeguarded. 1.6 million residents of Massachusetts depend upon Medicaid for their health care insurance. 730,000 Massachusetts citizens depend upon the Affordable Care Act for their health care. We're a state of 7 million people. That's 2.3 million people who are dependent upon just those two programs alone. So if you multiply that times the cuts in education, Title I, and programs for kids who need a little extra help, you multiply that by the cuts in the tax breaks for wind and solar, all new innovation technologies. That's what we call Greentown. That's what we call the engine in Somerville and in Cambridge. If they are successful in their cuts to the NIH programs, that's devastating for us here in Massachusetts. Last year, we received $3.5 billion in NIH grants. We received 9% of all NIH funding came here. We're only 2% of America. 35,000 jobs here are dependent upon the NIH funding, which we receive on a yearly basis. That will cascade right into the economy of Massachusetts in a dramatic way. So I could go program by program by program by program, National Science Foundation grants, National Institutes of Safety and Technology, all the way down the line. But the bottom line is that what Trump and Musk are trying to do is to dismantle the federal government as we know it. And we're going to be very dependent upon both the courts and upon Republicans in the House and Senate standing up and fighting for the constitutional prerogatives of the House and Senate as outlined in the United States Constitution. So the impacts on Massachusetts will be dramatic, as they will be in every other state in the Union. And even right now, Musk is asking for access to the tax records of every single American, which is absolutely authoritarian in its insinuation into the lives of ordinary Americans. So Elon Musk won't give up his tax records so the public can see them. And as a result, we must withhold all of the tax records of all Americans from him because otherwise there will be a terrorizing impact it will have upon all 330 million Americans if he has that kind of access without any kind of clearance whatsoever. So there's a chilling future set of atrocities which they're planning right now, and that's why we need the courts. We need Democrats to be up and fighting, and that's what I'm doing. But we're going to need a few Republicans of conscience to also step up. This is a chilling threat to the Constitution as it was finally promulgated, and without some small handful of Republicans standing up, Trump will just feel that he has a blank check, and that is absolutely not going to happen. The courts will step up, and Democrats are going to fight until finally the public says to Republicans, you are going to lose your seats in the House and Senate if you continue to vote with this dictator. Question from anybody?
If I may ask an off-topic question?
Yes, excuse me, sir?
If I may ask an off-topic question?
Sure.
This is related to the state. So the utility rates lately doubled and tripled, which put a huge burden on residents in Massachusetts. number of state senators signed a letter submitted to the Department of Public Utility to look into it and investigate the utility companies and see why the rate hikes. Companies are saying it's the cold and the usage of all the energy. What do you think of that?
A 24% increase is unacceptable. Massachusetts is too dependent upon natural gas. The natural gas industry is seeking to perpetuate that by funding lawsuits to kill our offshore wind future, to kill the tax breaks in the federal law right now that incentivize renewable energy, including offshore wind and solar. So we have a real battle with the natural gas industry. And we just have to absolutely take it on. 24% is unacceptable, and it is an absolute battle that is being waged here in Massachusetts, but on the floor of the United States Senate and House in the next couple of weeks. The natural gas industry is seeking to repeal all of the tax breaks for wind and solar, all of the incentives for an alternative energy future for our country. So we are absolutely, right now seeing the effects of having a natural gas industry with such dominance over our energy portfolio in Massachusetts, but they want to actually increase that power. And that's all going to be fought out over the next couple of weeks and into the fall of this year. Question from anybody? Thank you all so much. Thanks for